Let me start not with Herodotus, but with the name that comes up so much, the person and the poet who comes up so much when we're talking about Greece and the athletics, and that's Pindar. And more particularly with the celebratory odes that he wrote for one victor in particular, King Hieron of Syracuse and Etna. So it's a big poet writing in very, very big language for a very big king. It always seems to me a bit odd, actually, to think of a king winning the Olympics, because we don't actually mean he was there driving a chariot himself, any more than when we talk about Aga Khan winning a race, we mean that he was actually riding on the horse. He was funding it, he was providing the horses, he was training the trainers of charioteers, and so on. I remember, as with many families, when I was a kid, we got our first television for the coronation. Everybody else in my family was very excited by seeing the coronation a few days later. But what really got to me, I'd heard somebody say that it was thought that the Queen was quite likely to win the Derby 3 or 4 days afterwards. And even as a 5-year-old, I thought, this is something I just have to see. It was all very disappointing. Now, one thing's immediately clear about the Pindar Odes to Hieron, and that's how much it mattered to someone like Hieron, just as, indeed, as we saw from Hazel's slides, it still matters to the Queen. Horses and charioteers and trainers, they don't come cheap. Pindar most definitely didn't come cheap. And perhaps it particularly mattered to a king like Hieron in Syracuse, in Sicily, very much part of the Greek world, but also very much on the fringes of the Greek world, with other parts of Sicily, other peoples in Sicily who most definitely weren't Greek, were Elymian, Phoenician, and so on. The Olympics are such a Greek thing. They're such a badge of Greek identity, only Greeks allowed to compete. And Hieron cared an awful lot about being Greek, winning the Olympics and getting an ode from the greatest of Hepernesian poets, marks the same sort of Greek pride as Hieron also shows in dedicating a bronze helmet at Olympia, no less, to celebrate a military victory around the same time over the Etruscans in 474 BC, a helmet indeed that is here in the British Museum. I'll show it's a British Museum slide there. But I'd like to pick up a rather different aspect of Pindar's Odes for Hieron. Critics have several times remarked on the way that these poems seem particularly rich in warnings, in particular warnings about getting too big for comfort, too big for one's boots, almost literally getting above oneself, in fact, getting so that one is almost on a par with the gods. And we've only got to look at the myths, which Pindar, as Pindar usually does, incorporates in these poems. In Olympian 1, it's the story of Tantalus, who offended the gods by taking away their nectar and ambrosia for a dinner party of his own. Pythian 1, it's Typhos, buried under Etna for confronting Zeus. Pythian 2, Ixion, who did the very unwise thing of attempting to rape Hera and was not a very sensible course at all. So, okay, Pindar's not stupid. He doesn't say, trouble with you, Hieron, is you're in particular danger of falling into the same pattern. But there's still more than usual of such remarks as one must not contend with a god who at one time raises one group of men's fortune and at another times gives great glory to others. Or summaries such as, if the wardens of Olympus honoured any mortal man, then Tantalus was the one. He, however, could not digest his good fortune, and you can see the rest. So what are we to make of that? One view is that Pindar seems to have thought Hieron particularly in need of reminders not to overstep the mark. Well, maybe, but it's rather hard to believe that this is an impression that Pindar actually wanted to give. It's not the way to speak to a man in power, not if one wants to get the next commission as well. And this might be the sort of big Sicilian who could even send the boys around if he takes that amiss. No, I think it's better to take it rather differently and to take it actually as a sort of compliment. You, Hieron, you've achieved so much. You've achieved so much as ruler of Syracuse, kind, gentle, measured, these are the sort of words you get. So much as conqueror of those pesky Etruscans. And now so much as Olympic victor, Pythian victor. If anybody is going to get close to rivaling the gods among mortals, it's you. It's you. But if it's so, if it's meant to have relevance to anybody, it's going to be you. But more than that, you're also so wise that this is the sort of advice that you're expecting. You know already where the boundaries are. You won't take this badly. This is a sort of wisdom which will chime with what you want to hear. You're big, but not so big that you can't handle knowing the limitations of the bigness. So the implied compliment is that both this is relevant to your situation, but you're so insightful, it's also that you won't mind hearing it. You may be expecting to hear it. So, bigness, but not, if one's wise, too much bigness. Greekness, this badging of Greek identity. And these are the things that are going to be central as we turn to Herodotus as well. Herodotus writing towards the end of the 5th century. It's usually put about 425. That's a bit less certain that people say. But of course, writing about events that culminate in the Great Persian Wars in 490, 480, 479. And indeed, I'd like to start with Herodotus with the story that Chris has already mentioned, has already come up today, the story of Alexander, son of Amyntas. It's a story of the Olympic Games of, it's usually said 496, probably slightly more likely to be 504 or 500 BC. And here again, it's a royal who wins, but this time it's a royal who actually does the sprinting himself. It's in the sprint, so he actually breaks sweat. It's not like Hieron. And it is Alexander of Macedon, the future king Alexander I. And I put it on the screen. What I'd want to stress as we go through it is how extremely visual it is, really. Once when Alexander of Macedon decided to compete in the games and came down into the arena for that purpose, that coming down, it's not simply arriving at Olympia, it's coming down from wherever the spectators are, coming down, give you the impression it's rather unexpected. The Greeks who are drawn against him in the foot race tried to bar him from taking part, and it's again a very, very physical word. You can see them all sort of gathering around and making their argument that barbarians are not allowed to compete in the games. These are exclusively for Greeks. That was with some very colloquial sort of Anglo-Saxon versions of Greeks at the time. However, Alexander demonstrated, and again it's showing that he was actually an Argive by ancestry, was therefore judged to be a Greek. You see him arguing there. You demonstrated it. It's not as if he's going to be pulling out any paperwork. There's nowhere to put your paperwork if you're about to compete in the sprint. He's arguing with them, and you can see him, yeah, all right, I suppose so. And he competes in the sprint, and he comes equal first, sonex epipteto protovo. And again, that's a very, very vigorous and visual word. He falls out. You can see him coming to the end of a course and comes out in a dead heat with the other person who comes first. So it's so detailed, it's so vivid, so vigorous. Detail in Herodotus always tells, and this is a story that is meant to live in the mind. It does. And it doesn't come just anywhere. This is the point where, after a lot of circling around, Herodotus is coming back to treat the preliminaries of that great war between East and West, between Persia and Greece. East and West are introducing very strongly at the beginning of Book 1, but we've gone into Egypt and India and Libya and Scythia and all sorts of other things. But we're now coming back around and coming back into land. And it's a good place to mark the importance of being Greek. And it's clearly very important to Alexander of Macedon on another fringe of the Greek world, just as it was important to Hieron of Syracuse to be considered Greek. And it also comes just after another story of Alexander that many of you will remember, and that dates, in fact, from a few years later, as he's already, he's not already king by then, but it dates from the time that Persia is advancing through Macedon. Persian ambassadors have come to the court of his father, King Amyntas, to demand submission, and these Persians behave very badly indeed over dinner. They want women to be present. Well, we don't really do that here, but seeing as you are the masters, says Amyntas, they call in some very respectable women. They're told to sit opposite. That won't do, says the Persians. Come and sit over here. And again, Amyntas very reluctantly agrees, and at that point, the Persians start behaving very badly indeed. And young Alexander is present and is furious, and he turns to his father and says, "I think it's time for you to go to bed." And Father Amyntas suspects that the son is up to something. "No, don't do anything silly, don't do anything silly, but yeah, all right, I'll go to bed." Alexander then tells the Persians, "Just hold on a moment. It would be much better if you let the women go and have a bath." All right, so the women go and have a bath. The Persians clearly carry on drinking, but because when the women come back, they don't actually notice that they're rather less female than they were before. And this is, in fact, a group of beardless young men. And you can guess what happens. Each Greek pulls out his dagger. It all turns into a thoroughly disappointing evening for the Persians. And that's Alexander's last shot to them. I won't take you through it, but you can see what's there. We've given you everything that we possessed. We've now lavished on you the gift of your mothers and sisters. You can fully understand you're getting the honors you deserve. It's a wonderful example, actually, of how, in a rather Greek way, in fact, logos itself, speech, is being travestied. It's not quite it doesn't mean what they think it means. You can report back to the king who sent you that a man of Greece, for Greekness again, a captain of the Macedonians, gave you a warm welcome to table and to bed. And earlier on he said it's nearly bedtime, and indeed it is. It's a big sleep that he gives them. And it's a lovely story, and Herodotus tells it, as he always does, beautifully. But it is again a very good story to have here as we come back to this showdown between Persia and Greece. It points forward to so much of what is to come. The Persians are going to come in their bully boy sort of way. They're going to take all sort of liberties. And it's modern scholarship's brought out how often this lack of respect for bodies, particularly female bodies, tends often to presage a lack of respect for whole people's national boundaries as well. And the Persians don't get it. They don't understand what they're taking on. This is a lot more than they expected. The Greeks aren't going to stand for it. This Greekness is not going to be just a matter of sleek young men in the symposium, but these sleek young men are going to be doing something much riskier in defense of their local honor and against tyrannical behavior. But I think there's more to it than that. Remember those words of Amyntas, "Don't do anything silly." Some of you many of you, I think, will remember a lovely Dad's Army episode where Captain Mannering says to the captured U-boat captain, "Now you see what sort of men you're taking on." "Yes," says the German U-boat captain, "very stupid ones." And there is something genuinely very stupid of what Alexander is doing. It's inviting all sorts of reprisals. It may seem the right thing. It is an admirable thing, but in a way it is folly. And this is going to come later as well. Several times Herodotus very explicitly calls the actions of the Greek states who don't go over to Persia, who don't Medize, who are prepared to fight for liberty, he calls it folly. Agnomosene is a word that keeps back in the Greeks. It's a failure to get your thoughts in order. It's glorious folly, it's admirable folly, it's a sort of pride in the freedom that makes them distinctively Greek, but folly still, if one looks at it in any rational way. And so far, all this can be presented as in a very celebratory, triumphalist way even the folly part, really. It's great to be Greek. If you've got to have folly, this is obviously exactly the right sort of folly to have. And it is very, very moving. It's rather like there's a recent performance of Aeschylus's Persians in the theatre at Epidavros, when the actor stopped very artfully after the line where it's being explained to the Persian queen that they are no man's subjects, no man's slaves. And immediately the theatre erupted in tremendous applause, and it was wonderful, actually. This is not a people who like to be told by foreigners what to do. But Herodotus has a neat way always of stopping his own audience in their tracks, presumably a Greek audience, whenever they're tempted to become too proud of themselves and their Greekness. Reprisals don't, in fact, come after Alexander's act of folly. Why? Because he bribes off the investigating Persian band. He even gives his sister in marriage, in fact, to one of those inquisitive Persian bigwigs who come to see what's happened. That's smart. Herodotus calls it wisdom, sophia, not at all folly. But it's not so glorious. And Alexander himself, in the later narrative, isn't so glorious either. He's firmly on the Persian side when the crunch comes. He's given another big scene as really a Persian messenger boy, encouraging the Athenians after Salamis, before Plataea, to come over to the Persian side. That produces an Athenian response, a very uplifting Greek response. As long as the sun follows its same path in the sky, we Greeks will never come to terms with Xerxes. That's not straightforward either. They're talking about precisely that a few chapters later. But this Greek badging that I'm talking about, it certainly continues to be central to what he's doing, why he's important to the text. But he ends up by being a little bit less Greek and a bit too close to the Persians and to tyranny for comfort. And he's by no means alone. There are several Olympic winners who come to rather sticky ends, often because they become too big, again, too close to tyranny or being a tyrant for comfort. There's several of them very closely further on in the text, in this same part of Book 5 and Book 6, when we're coming back to the Greek world. There's Philippos of Croton. Croton gets lots of Olympic winners in southern Italy. He joins up with the ill-fated Dorius, who leaves Sparta after a tiff with after outrage at his half-brother Cleomenes becoming king. Both Philippos and Croton die rather messily embroiled in a local dispute in southern Italy. A little further on, again, we find a flashback to an earlier period at Athens when it was an Olympic victor, Cylon, who grew his hair long with an eye for tyranny. Long, exuberant hair. It's a very bad sign in a male, that's fair enough to me. And he dies too, with very messy consequences. A book later, we've got Demaratus of Sparta, again a brotherly dispute, a half-brotherly dispute at Sparta. He ends up on the Persian side, invading with Xerxes. On the Athenian side, there's a great Miltiades, again from a family of Olympic winners, who again has got the whiff of a tyrant about him. More than a whiff, he becomes a tyrant in the Chersonese. But then he comes back, he plays the absolutely crucial part in the victory at Marathon, before he too ends rather messily on trial at Athens. But he is also the one who has done so much at Marathon. In a sense, we're back to Pindar, if you like. These great men, all the greater for their Olympic successes, there is a danger it can all turn sour, but the really great know it, and they can turn it all to the good. They can be saviors of their people like Miltiades, just as Hieron could be presented as his people's savior in Sicily. And there's another big Athenian family too that goes back to an Olympic victor, shows a lot of Olympic victors, in fact, and that's the Alcmaeonids, great family. Relevant mostly at this point of Herodotus' narrative because it's a family of Cleisthenes, in many ways the founder of Athenian democracy. And his grandfather, Cleisthenes' grandfather, was Cleisthenes of Sicyon, so another tyrant. Again, this is a company they keep, if you like. And that also, Cleisthenes of Sicyon is an Olympic victor and the son of a victor. And we're told how the marriage that produced the Athenian Cleisthenes came about. It's a dramatic high spot of Book 6, in fact. And the Olympics are in the air there. Cleisthenes of Sicyon has won the chariot race at the Olympics, and he issues an invitation for suitors to come to his court 60 years later to contend for the hand of his daughter Agariste. Several mythical prototypes in the air there. One of them is probably the story of Pelops and his quest for the hand of Oenomaus, his daughter, which is the myth that we get in Olympian 1 and is in many ways a founding myth of the Olympics. Olympics are still there. We get a long list of the suitors, and there are various oddities in those lists of suitors, not least for towns where people don't come from. There's nobody from nearby Corinth, for instance, or Thebes, and a lot from southern Italy. It's a brilliant forthcoming article by Simon Hornblower, where he looks at the places where these people are coming from and draws a lot of analogies with the early Olympic victor lists. These are the places that tend to produce Olympic victors and Olympic contenders. So still more Olympics in the air. And so it's as if the Olympic Games, where the invitation was issued, have toppled over into the wedding preparations competition as well. says running, wrestling, trials in the gymnasium in this year-long competition. And eventually it comes to a famous banquet. And I suppose in itself that can echo what you get at the end of the Olympics, a victory feast, the celebration. And this may be where some perhaps the early form of a victory ode could be performed as well, not as grand as the ones we get later and still have. The victor is about to be announced. It's going to be a certain Hippocleides of Athens. But you know how things can develop late in a good party. This time it's dancing that catches him out. He first does a Spartan dance on the table, calls for a table. Spartan dance, some Athenian figures, maybe a sort of a hint perhaps of a Panhellenic elements of the Olympic Games, not sure. But then he finally stood on his head on the table and waggled his feet around. And this has produced some interesting scholarly debate on the great issue of whether Greek males wore underpants or not, which Leslie Kirk, who's seating tomorrow, has, I know, become interested in at some point. Cleisthenes is already thinking this is not a very good son-in-law after all. And when he finally sees him waggling his legs around, he could no longer restrain himself. "Son of Tysander, you've danced away your marriage." And the young man replied, "Hippocleides doesn't care." I suspect he's going to care a good deal more in the morning, actually. And that is how the proverb arose. And there's a certain amount more going for it in the Greek, is that danced away, aporkeisao, has got that crucial syllable ork in the middle of it, that does, I think, unmistakably suggest the Greek word for testicles. So again, think about the underpants, or rather, probably don't. As one recent scholar has put it, you really ballsed up for marriage. But another Athenian is duly proclaimed a victor. This is the future father of Cleisthenes of Athens. It's also very, very visual again, perhaps too visual for comfort indeed. And Herodotus carefully goes on to point out this is also the ancestor of Pericles, and his mention of Pericles here. We do get these great men who can do a great deal of good and a great deal of ill, and you get them particularly when the Olympics have been in the air. But there's another rather more serious undertone to it. Again, it's clearly a very, very good story. There's competitiveness here, just as in the games, and there's going to be an awful lot of competitiveness when we get back to the more serious business of taking on the Persian invader. And once again, it can be presented in a very rosy-eyed way. The Olympics come back into focus, indeed, at one particularly rosy-eyed time, when momentarily we're on the Persian side. Some deserters arrive. They're asked what the Greeks are doing. "They're holding the Olympics," was the reply. "We've already been told that many of the Greeks' contingent didn't turn up at Thermopylae because of the Olympic Games. They're watching the athletic and equestrian events. What's the prize that they're competing for? An olive crown. This Antichmes said something very noble. As a result, Xerxes took him to be a coward." Again, the Persians not quite getting it, as I was talking about earlier. When he was told that the prize was not financial but a crown, he couldn't stop himself saying in front of everyone, "What sort of men have you led us to fight, Mardonius? They compete not about money but about excellence." And it's again one of those really marvelous, make you proud to be a Greek moments. And it's not wrong. We do see that great contention for honor on the Greek side. After all the major battles, there's a scene where Herodotus weighs up, sometimes shows the contenders themselves weighing up who fought the best, who won the most honor. There's even contention before battle. There's a long argument between Athenians and the Tegeans, men of Tegea, on who deserves a place of honor before the battle line at Plataea. But again, Herodotus has those stop you in the tracks before you get to complacent moments as well. They compete not about money. Well, hello? The Greeks care an awful lot about money. Themistocles, the great admiral, cares a lot about money, and in the course of the Salamis campaigns, pockets an absolutely, or the best part of an immense bribe for himself. Olympic victors do very well for money when they get back to their own towns. And these deserters, they come from Arcadia, top of the screen. Men who are hard up and looking for employment. Arcadia is a great source of mercenaries. These are clearly mercenaries. They want and they're prepared to fight for Persia against Greeks. Herodotus wouldn't be at all surprised, I think, to see people advertising their Olympic torches on eBays. They indeed, I think, have thought it folly to do absolutely anything else. And even glorifying the Olympics is not unrelieved. We're given a heavy hint later on that it was pretty much an excuse of some parties, at least, not to use the Olympics and indeed the Carnea at Sparta not to turn up at Thermopylae. But let me end by going back to the competitiveness. At those wetting games, it turns sour, but not ludicrously so. There are times when it's far more dangerous. When the Persian threat looms, ambassadors from Athens and Sparta go to Syracuse, so full circle with Hieron. And this time it's Gelon of Syracuse that they are calling on, in the name of Greece, to Greek unity to come to their help. Yes, he says, if I can be their leader. Says the Sparta, absolutely no way, no, unthinkable that a Spartan could be ordered around by a Syracusan. Right, says Gelon, let me command the fleet. Oh, hang on, says the Athenian. And so we go on, and by now Gelon has had enough. You, my Athenian friend, you seem to have leaders, you'll have no one for them to lead. You make no concessions, you want to keep everything for yourself, go home immediately. Tell Greece that the spring has gone out of the year. Spring has gone out of the year. Well, on one level, that's simply you haven't got the resources that you need, you were hoping for. The manpower, the ships, the supplies, and so on. But it hints at something else, I think. It hints at what would be a famous remark to Herodotus' audience, a remark made by Pericles some 40 years later at least, in a funeral speech. And Pericles, when he talked about the spring being taken out of the year, meant the young men that he was commemorating. Gelon's words too surely suggest the deaths that will come, all those young men that will come, because of that Greek parochial pride, competitiveness, honor, getting out of hand. And maybe it hints to, there are so many hints of the competitiveness and the inter-Greek rivalry that's going to come after the Persian Wars in those years coming down to Pericles and those battles. So maybe it hints at all those other deaths too, that the Greek competitiveness and rivalry will lead to. And in many ways, and this is my last point, it's just a version perhaps of a paradox of freedom. Freedom inspires the Greeks. There's so much of it around in Herodotus, and that's clear. They're no man's subjects, no man's slaves. But freedom also allows every individual contingent the possibility of walking away, to be out for themselves, just the way that athletes are out for themselves. Ancient Olympics aren't big on team sports. Many do, some for many, some because they simply see the folly of remaining. There's certainly no inevitability about the triumph of freedom. It's all only jest. For good and the potentially disastrous aspects hang so very closely together. And perhaps that rings a bell as well. Just as in a way the only jestness strikes a modern Greek bell. Just think of the 2004 Olympics. 2 months before they begin, shambles, workers on strike, stadia not finished, tramway not finished, expressway not finished. Yes, it was fine. It worked perfectly. It was one of the best of modern Olympics. There is a good track record for pulling things out of the flames when it seems pretty hopeless. And for all those that care us about Greece in the terrible situation that's so sad that we all now feel so deeply, that hope, even at a time when it would be only jest, is one that we will want to cling on to. Thank you very much.